What it do, everybody? It's your boy King Crowder back again with another edition of History You May Not Know and Figures That Are Not Taught in Detail for Show. Today's lesson will be focused on the great Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, better known as Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy Johnson was born October 31st, 1905 in Charleston, South Carolina. Most people do not know he was given the name Bumpy for his abnormal growth he had around his head. As a child, Bumpy was raised in South Carolina to the age of 9 or 10. After his older brother was wanted for murdering the right man around that time for defending himself, 10-year-old Bumpy, along with his siblings, was forced to move to New York City to Harlem. Despite moving to the north, there was no scourge of racism. Johnson felt that with his strong southern accent and small frame, he was a target for bullying. However, Bumpy's temper and his half-blessed mentality did not let him be a victim. He learned how to be a scrappy fighter. Johnson dropped out of high school, worked odd jobs, and had a good job of working the crowd, which brought him the attention of the gangster Bud Hewlett. Throughout, Hewlett and Johnson became a highly regarded bodyguard for the illegal gamblers in Harlem. Eventually, Johnson's extracurricular activities as far as burgling and pimping would land him in prison for a decade. So Bumpy got put into prison and was gone for 10 years. By the time he was 30, Johnson had spent half his life in prison. A punishment for causing trouble and involved in bribery, thievery, and pimping. When Johnson left prison in 1932, he broke unemployment and became the powerfulest man named in Harlem. With Johnson's help, St. Clair waged a war against the New York crime bosses. Bumpy and his crew waged 9 guerrilla warfares, attacking the Italians, weakening them, and what he began to get his nickname known as the Godfather of Harlem. Johnson murdered and kidnapped people from time to time. He did whatever he needed to because he was a gangster. But despite his lackluster attitude, Bumpy got the nod from the Italians. Bumpy was dedicated, honest, loyal, and smart. He got the nod to run over Harlem just by how and who he was. Even though the community feared Bumpy, they loved and respected him. Why? Because Bumpy gave back turkeys, Thanksgiving meals, fed them, and had workers-related programs. Bumpy was known because he was sold the doogie, better known as the heroin in his era. He began to sell heroin, owning the other areas where he was going. People do not know this about Bumpy. Johnson received a 15-year sentence for conspiracy to sell heroin in New York City. He was sentenced to Alcatraz in San Francisco, where he was released in 1963, 5 years before his death. Rap sheet of 40 arrests in his lifetime, Johnson found himself on a watchful eye of the authority. With his renegade criminal background, Johnson decided to go a different way. While eating at a soul food restaurant in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack, surrounded by all his friends and confidants. Most people do not know one thing about Johnson that I found is so miraculous. He had a great relationship with the great Malcolm X. Johnson worked with Malcolm because Malcolm was a former street brother who could talk to all the masses. Johnson and Malcolm X's relationship was tremendous. Johnson was for his community and was politically active. He believed in what Malcolm said about self-defense and how you arm yourself. Now, Bumpy was a gangster, and he did involve himself in bad things. But he had the respect of Malcolm because, one, Malcolm didn't fear him, and he stood on his business. Bumpy supported, gave security, and enforced the love for the great Malcolm. Their relationship should be discussed more about Bumpy Johnson and his things he suffered with. Bumpy was a gangster. He did gangster activities and lived the gangster lifestyle. But I do think his relationship with the great Malcolm X should be emphasized, supported, and what are the blessings he had going around him. Bumpy, the icon, the crime boss, the doogie pusher and the legend, is one of the greatest people to not be born, but brought up inside of Harlem. It's your boy King Crowder, checking back out again with another lesson on things we may not know, in history we may not be taught for sure. Today's lesson was on the great Bumpy Johnson. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you take away from this lesson and make sure you smash that subscribe button. It's your boy checking out. I see you next time. Peace.